Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another lovely sunny day here in Playa Blanca in Lanzarote. A few weeks ago I did a video on moving to Lanzarote after Brexit, and it proved to be really popular. So far about 26,000 views, so thanks very much to everybody who viewed and those who commented on it and those who found it useful. Then I did a follow-up video on getting your TIE, your residency permit, once you'd arrived in Spain. Now, the Spanish government is currently considering new laws regarding visas and immigration. And whilst it affects lots of different types of visas, the only one I'm going to look at today is how it affects people who might be applying for the non-lucrative visa, as we did. Part of the reason for introducing new rules is to reduce bureaucracy, which for everybody can only be a good thing. So the Spanish government has produced draft legislation which relates to many different areas of visas. But as I said, I'm only looking at the areas that concern people on non-lucrative visas. And you have to bear in mind that the law's not yet been passed. It may be amended as it goes through the various stages of the Spanish Parliament. And when it is approved, if it's in its current form, it will come into effect probably sometime in 2025. So what then are the changes for the non-lucrative visa requirements? Well, looking at the draft law, I don't see any changes at all in respect of the application process for the non-lucrative visa. The financial requirements are still the same, but one thing you have to bear in mind is it's based on what is called the IPREM, a Spanish financial index, and that changes, or it is reviewed in January each year. Now, it didn't increase in January 2024, so it may well increase in January 2025, which is something to look out for, and I'll keep you updated on that. But looking at the draft legislation, it seems that the biggest change is in relation to renewals. Now, if you see my earlier video, you'll know that after the first year, you need to review for 2 years. And then after your third year, you need to renew for another 2 years. Now, the proposal is that you'll only have to renew after the first year in Spain. So you'll get your non-lucrative visa, which gives you residency for 12 months. And then at the end of 12 months, you will renew your residency for 4 years. So that will save people having to do a renewal at the end of year 1 and at the end of year 3. So that will take you up to the full 5-year temporary residence period. For anybody like us who've done the 2 and 3 year renewal and the 4 and 5 year renewal, will understand how long it takes to get together all the paperwork that you need for proof of funds, for proof of health cover, your renewed empadronamiento, and various other documents that are required by the immigration in order to assess your application for continued residency. So the fact that you'll only have to do it once in your 5-year period is really good news. On the other side of that is the requirement for proof of funds. Your initial visa application is for 1 year, and you need to prove sufficient funds for 1 year. Now, at renewal, you're actually renewing for 2 more years. And according to the law, you need to provide proof that you have sufficient funds to sustain yourself and any dependents for the 2-year period that you're applying for. Now, I know some people will argue with that, and in some parts of Spain, I know people have got people through the renewal process without 2 years proof of funds. But by the letter of the law, you need 2 years proof of funds. Now, of course, if your proof of funds is through an annual income that matches or exceeds the EPREM, then that won't be a problem. But if you are relying purely on savings, then you will need to show sufficient funds for each of the years you're applying for. So with the new rules, if you're applying for a 4-year residency permit, then by the letter of the law, you'll require 4 years of savings. Now, at current rates in 2024, for a single applicant, you'd need over €115,000 in the bank for your 4-year period. Or if you're a couple, you would need €144,000 in the bank. Now, in terms of proof of funds for the required period, I mentioned the current law for the 2-year period. The new draft law says exactly the same. So it says you will be required to prove that you've got sufficient funds for each year of the period of residency you're applying for. So there isn't any change there. But as I say, some advisors are saying in some areas they will accept the proof of funds for just 1 year. Now, like many things, it's a matter of interpretation by an official on the day or the week that you happen to go. All I can say here is the law says you need sufficient funds for the period you're applying for. So I shall leave that there. Now, as you know, with the application process for the non-lucrative visa, you need to get from the UK an ACRO police certificate to show whether or not you have any criminal convictions. And I've seen a lot of people put posts online saying, well, when I was 17 or 18, I did something stupid and I've got a conviction, and will that stop me from getting a visa? Now, I've no doubt that the Spanish officials considering applications for visas will look at the circumstances and how old you were and what type of offence it was, how serious or minor it was, and they will take all that into consideration when processing your visa application. But the new draft law actually addresses this issue. Now, I haven't seen anything in the current law, so I don't know if there is anything in the current law that says this. But the new legislation, if it's approved, does address this issue. And what the new law says is that in processing your application and determining whether or not you're suitable for a visa, they will have to take into account the threat to public order, the threat to public security, and the threat to public health. And they'll also have to determine whether or not that is a serious threat, whether it is a real threat, and whether it is a current threat. So whilst it will always be a subjective assessment, based on that criteria, if you have a relatively minor conviction from many years ago, it's highly unlikely that you'd be rejected for your visa. So whilst nobody can say definitely, again, it's a matter of interpretation of the rules on the day by a particular official. So whilst of course there is an avenue to appeal if you think that you've been wrongly rejected for a visa. So whilst there's no definitive answer, I hope that helps some people who may have minor convictions from some years ago. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention is the Schengen 180-day rule, which so many people seem to think is going to be scrapped or changed by Spain. Well, I've said this many times before. Firstly, it's a Schengen rule, and as Spain is part of Schengen, it cannot be changed by Spain alone. Yes, what Spain can do is they can introduce different kinds of visas, but on the face of the new legislation, there aren't any new kinds of visas that would cover short-term residency that would effectively get round the 90, 180 day rule. In fact, in the new draft legislation, it actually reiterates the 90 in 180 day rule. So for anybody that's thinking that things are going to change on that score, then I think you're going to be disappointed. Now, as I said earlier in the video, this is draft legislation. It's not yet been approved. I think the parts that I've talked about are likely to be approved because the whole idea is to reduce the bureaucracy. And certainly in terms of the renewals, having to do it only once instead of twice will reduce bureaucracy. So I think that is likely to come into effect. But watch this space. Consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notifications button so that you won't miss anything in respect of updates on the requirements to moving to Spain. And my next video, I'm going to be talking about long-term residency, or some people refer to it as permanent residency, which you are entitled to apply for once you've been resident in Spain for 5 years. And that will be our next step in early 2026. So I'm currently looking at all the requirements for that, and I shall be doing a video on that. So look out for that video if that's something that might interest you. So once again, so you don't miss any of my updates or further videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit that notification button down below. And in any case, thanks very much for watching. Have a good day and take care.